My mom gave my childhood dog away without telling me. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The silence hit me first. I'd been gone for 3 months, my first semester away at college, and as I turned the corner onto Maple Street with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I was already smiling at the thought of Max's frantic barking. He always knew when I was coming home before anyone else did, some mysterious dog sense that could detect my footsteps from half a block away. But there was no barking, no excited whining or scratching at the gate. Just the ordinary quiet of a Tuesday afternoon in November, with dead leaves rustling in the wind and Mrs. Henderson's cat picking its way delicately across our front yard. I told myself he was probably napping inside. Max was 12 now, after all. No longer the boundless golden retriever puppy who'd arrived on my 8th birthday, but a dignified senior dog who spent more time sleeping in sunny patches on the kitchen floor than chasing tennis balls in the backyard. It made sense that he wouldn't hear me coming the way he used to. But as I reached our front gate, the wrongness of the scene became impossible to ignore. Max's favorite tennis ball. The raggedy green one he'd been carrying around for 2 years wasn't in its usual spot by the porch steps. His water bowl wasn't by the back door. The wooden doghouse my dad had built for him when we first brought him home was empty. Its red paint faded, but the emptiness inside sharp and final. "Max?" I called out, dropping my bag and jogging around to the backyard. "Max, come here, boy." Nothing, just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the fence. I found my mother in the kitchen, standing at the sink and washing dishes like it was any other day. She looked up when I walked in, her face brightening with the kind of genuine happiness that made me feel guilty for the panic that was starting to claw at my chest. "Jamie, you're home early. I wasn't expecting you until Thursday. Where's Max?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. She paused, her hands still submerged in sudsy water. "Oh, right. I was going to call you about that." "Call me about what? Where is he?" She dried her hands slowly, deliberately, not meeting my eyes. "I found him a new home. A lovely family with children. I thought it would be better for him." The world tilted sideways. "You what?" "Jamie, sit down. Let me explain." "You gave away my dog?" My voice cracked like I was 13 again instead of 18, like the 3 months of carefully cultivated college sophistication had evaporated in an instant. "He wasn't really your dog anymore, honey. You've been gone since August, and you're only going to be home for a few weeks at Christmas and maybe some weekends. It wasn't fair to keep him here when he could have a real family." "I am his real family. He's been my dog for 10 years. "He was the family dog," she corrected gently, but there was steel underneath the softness. "And now that you're grown up and moved out, it didn't make sense to keep him." I stared at her. This woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to tie my shoes and helped me with algebra homework and driven me to soccer practice 1,000 times. She looked exactly the same as she had 3 months ago. Same short brown hair, same reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, same floral apron she'd been wearing since I was in middle school. But she'd given away Max. Max, who'd slept at the foot of my bed every night from age 8 to 18. Max, who'd been my constant companion through childhood illnesses, adolescent heartbreak, and the terror of starting high school. Max, who'd been the one consistent thing in my life when everything else was changing. "When?" I managed to ask. "2 weeks ago. I told you they're a lovely family. The Johnsons from over on Oak Street. They have twin boys, 8 years old, and they've been wanting a dog for—" "2 weeks ago?" I interrupted. "You've had 2 weeks to tell me and you didn't?" "I didn't want to upset you during midterms." "So you decided to let me come home expecting to see him instead?" She had the grace to look ashamed, but only briefly. "I thought it would be easier if it was just done. If you didn't have to think about it or worry about it." Easier for who? We stared at each other across the kitchen island, and I could see her struggling with something. Guilt, maybe, or frustration that I wasn't taking this as well as she'd apparently expected. Jamie, you have to understand. I've been taking care of that dog by myself for 3 months. Walking him twice a day, feeding him, taking him to the vet when he got that ear infection in September. You didn't call and ask how he was doing. You didn't come home to visit. As far as I could tell, you'd already moved on. I called every week. You called me, not him. You asked about school starting and Dad's new job and whether I'd heard from your cousin Sarah. You never once asked specifically about Max. The accusation hit harder than it should have because it was true. I'd been so busy with orientation and new friends and the overwhelming experience of college life that Max had become part of the background of home always there, reliable as sunrise, something I'd see again at Thanksgiving. But that didn't mean I'd stopped loving him. That doesn't give you the right to give him away, I said, and my voice was thick with tears I was trying not to shed. He wasn't just your responsibility. He was my friend. He was a dog, Jamie. The casual dismissal of everything Max had meant to me was like a physical blow. He wasn't just a dog, not to me. She sighed, and I could see her trying to summon patience for what she clearly viewed as an overreaction. Honey, I know you loved him, but you're 18 now. You're building a new life. It's time to let go of childhood things. Childhood things? I repeated, incredulous. Max isn't a stuffed animal I outgrew. He's a living being who loved me. Who loves his new family now. The Johnson boys are crazy about him, and he seems really happy there. You've seen him? I drive by sometimes when I'm running errands. He's always out in their yard playing with the boys. He looks good, Jamie. Healthy and content. The image she painted should have been comforting, but instead it felt like another betrayal. Max playing with other children, sleeping in another house, maybe even forgetting about me entirely. I walked over to the sliding glass door that led to our backyard and looked out at the empty space where Max's life had been lived for a decade. The grass was already growing back in the spots where he used to pace along the fence line, barking at squirrels and mailmen and the occasional stray cat. Soon there would be no evidence he'd ever been here at all. I need to see him, I said. Jamie, that's not a good idea. Why not? Because it'll just upset everyone. Max is settled now. The boys are attached to him. It would be cruel to confuse him. Cruel to who? To Max or to you? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I spent the rest of that day in my room, alternating between rage and grief and a hollow sort of disbelief. Everything was exactly as I'd left it in August. My high school trophies on the dresser, my favorite books on the shelf, even the same bedding I'd had since junior year. But without Max's presence in the house, it all felt like a museum exhibit. Jamie's childhood room, preserved exactly as it was the day she left for college. At dinner, my father tried to broker some kind of peace. Your mother was trying to do what she thought was best, he said carefully, serving himself mashed potatoes and avoiding eye contact with both of us. For who? I asked. For everyone. The dog was getting old, Jamie. He needed more attention than your mom could give him while working full-time. And honestly, he seemed lonely after you left. So the solution was to give him away without asking me? You're not here to ask, Mom said, and there was an edge to her voice now. You're busy with your new life, which is exactly what you should be doing at your age. I just don't understand why you're so upset about this. Because he was my dog. He was our dog, she corrected, and we made a decision about what was best for him. We? I don't remember being consulted. Dad cleared his throat. Jamie, you have to understand your mother's position. She's been dealing with everything here while you're away. The house, the bills, her job, taking care of Max. It was a lot. I looked at my parents. These people who'd raised me and presumably knew me better than anyone else in the world, and realized they had no idea what Max had meant to me. To them, he'd been a pet responsibility, a source of joy sometimes, but ultimately replaceable. They couldn't understand that to me, he'd been something closer to a sibling, a confidant, a constant in a childhood that had been otherwise marked by change and uncertainty. When I was 10 and my parents went through their rough patch, the year they went to marriage counseling and spoke to each other in careful, overly polite voices, Max had been the one who absorbed my anxiety when I couldn't sleep. When I was 13 and Jessica Morrison spread rumors about me that made 7th grade feel like a social minefield, Max had been the one who listened to me cry without judgment. When I was 16 and terrified about college applications and SATs and the entire future stretching out ahead of me, Max had been the one steady thing I could count on. He'd been my emotional support system before I even knew what that phrase meant. "I'm going to the Johnsons," I announced, standing up from the table. "Jamie, no," Mom said sharply. "I forbid it." "You forbid it?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm 18, Mom. You can't forbid me to do anything anymore. And you certainly can't forbid me to see my own dog." "He's not your dog anymore." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, but some fundamental trust I'd had in my mother's love for me, her understanding of who I was and what mattered to me. "Fine," I said. "Then I guess we don't have anything else to talk about." I left the house and walked the 6 blocks to Oak Street, my hands shaking with adrenaline and anger and a grief so deep it felt like drowning. The Johnsons' house was a cheerful yellow colonial with a white picket fence and the kind of perfect landscaping that suggested someone had both time and money to spend on their yard. Through the front window, I could see warm light and what looked like a family sitting down to dinner. And there, in the front yard, was Max. He was older than I remembered, grayer around the muzzle, moving with the careful deliberation of a senior dog. But when he saw me approaching the fence, his ears perked up and his tail started wagging. Slowly at first, then faster, then with the full-body enthusiasm I remembered from childhood. "Max," I whispered, and he whined and pressed his nose through the fence slats, his whole body wiggling with joy. I knelt down and reached through the fence to scratch behind his ears, the same spot that had always made him close his eyes in bliss. His fur was soft and clean, and he smelled like the expensive dog shampoo Mom had never bothered to buy. "Hey, buddy," I said, and my voice broke on the words. "I missed you so much." He licked my fingers through the fence and whined again, the same sound he used to make when I came home from school and he was still stuck in the backyard. "Jamie?" I looked up to see a woman in her 40s standing on the front porch, looking concerned but not unfriendly. Behind her, I could see 2 identical boys peering around her legs, their eyes wide with curiosity. "I'm sorry," I said, standing up and wiping at my eyes. I used to be Max's owner, before you got him." Her expression softened with understanding. "Oh, you're Linda's daughter. She mentioned you might come by." "She did?" "She said you were away at college and might want to see how Max was settling in." Mrs. Johnson walked down the front steps and over to where I stood by the fence. "I'm Carol, by the way." "Jamie. He's been wonderful with the boys," she said, gesturing to the twins who were still watching from the doorway. "They absolutely adore him." Max was still pressed against the fence, still focused entirely on me like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. It was exactly the way he'd always looked at me when I came home, like I was the most important thing in his universe. "Has he been happy?" I asked. "Very happy. He loves having playmates again. Your mother said he was getting lonely." The casual mention of my mother's involvement in this decision made my stomach clench again, but I tried to focus on Max. If he was happy, if he was loved, wasn't that what mattered most? Would it be okay if I spent a few minutes with him? I know it's weird, but Of course, Carol said kindly. "Would you like to come in the backyard? The boys would love to meet you, and Max could have more room to say hello properly." 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the Johnsons' backyard while Max laid his head in my lap the way he'd done thousands of times before. The twins, Danny and David, had peppered me with questions about what Max was like as a puppy, what tricks he knew, whether he'd always been so good at catching tennis balls. They were sweet kids, 8 years old and full of the kind of boundless energy that Max had always loved in children. I could see why he was thriving here. He was getting the attention and activity that I hadn't been able to give him anymore, not with school and work and all the complications of growing up. But watching him with these children, seeing how comfortable he was in their yard, sleeping in their house, being part of their family, felt like watching someone you love fall in love with someone else. "He still remembers you," Carol observed, watching Max lean into my touch with obvious contentment. "Do you think so?" "Oh, definitely. Dogs don't forget their first families, but they're also incredibly adaptable. They can love more than one family in their lifetime." I knew she was trying to be kind, to help me understand that Max could be happy here while still having loved me. But all I could think about was how easily he'd apparently moved on, how quickly he'd learned to love someone else. "Your mother did the right thing," Carol continued. "It can't have been easy for her, caring for an aging dog all by herself. And Max is getting so much more attention here with the boys. I would have come back," I said. "If she'd told me she was struggling, I would have come back and helped." "Would you have?" Carol asked gently. "Really? You would have given up college to take care of a dog?" The question hung in the air, and I realized I didn't have a good answer. Would I have dropped out of school for Max? Would I have transferred to a local college, given up my dorm room and my new friends and the future I was building? Probably not. But I would have wanted the choice. I stayed until the sun started setting and Carol gently mentioned that it was the boys' bedtime. Max walked me to the gate, his tail wagging but his steps slower than they used to be. When I knelt down to say goodbye, he licked my face and whined softly, like he knew this was different from our old hellos and goodbyes. "I love you, buddy," I whispered into his fur. "I'll always love you." He wagged his tail and looked up at me with those same brown eyes that had watched me grow up, that had seen me through every stage of childhood and adolescence. Eyes that had always looked at me like I was the center of his universe. Now they looked at me like they were saying goodbye. The walk home felt endless. By the time I reached our front door, I'd cycled through anger and sadness and acceptance and back to anger again. I found my parents in the living room watching the news and pretending this was a normal evening. "How did it go?" Mom asked carefully. "He's happy," I said, and the admission felt like another small death. "The family is nice. He's well taken care of." She nodded, relief evident on her face. "I'm glad you got to see that. But that doesn't make what you did okay." The relief disappeared. "Jamie, I thought we settled this." "We didn't settle anything. You made a unilateral decision about something that mattered to me, and you didn't even have the courtesy to discuss it with me first. You were at college. I have a phone." We stared at each other again, and I could see the same frustration in her eyes that I was feeling. We were talking past each other, neither of us understanding what the other person was really saying. "You keep saying I moved on," I said finally, "that I'd already started my new life and left Max behind. But that's not how it works, Mom. Growing up doesn't mean erasing everything that came before. It doesn't mean stopping loving the things that were important to you as a kid. I never said you had to stop loving him. But you took away my choice to keep loving him here, in my home, as part of my family. You decided for me that college meant I didn't need Max anymore." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. "Maybe I was wrong about the timing," she said finally. "Maybe I should have talked to you first." "Maybe?" "All right, yes, I should have talked to you first. But Jamie, the decision itself was still right. Max is better off with the Johnsons, and you need to focus on your future." "What if I want Max to be part of my future?" "Then you should have thought about that before you moved away." The accusation stung because, again, it wasn't entirely unfair. I had moved away. I had gotten caught up in college life. I had assumed Max would always be there waiting for me, and I hadn't considered the burden that might place on my mother. But that didn't erase the fact that she'd made this choice without me, had decided what was best for both Max and me without asking either of us what we wanted. That night, I called my roommate Sarah and told her everything. She listened patiently while I cried and raged and tried to make sense of the complicated mix of emotions churning inside me. "It sounds like your mom was trying to do right by the dog," she said when I was finally done. "Even if she went about it the wrong way." "I know that. Rationally, I know that. But Sarah, it feels like she erased part of my childhood without asking me." "Maybe she did, but maybe that's part of growing up, having other people make decisions about your past when you're not there to defend it." It wasn't the validation I'd been hoping for, but it felt true in a way that hurt. I went back to the Johnsons' house 3 more times before I had to return to school. Each visit was easier and harder than the last. Easier because Max clearly enjoyed seeing me. Harder because it became increasingly obvious that this was his home now. The last time I brought his old tennis ball, the green one I'd found in my closet, probably forgotten there since high school. He sniffed it with interest, but didn't seem to remember it the way I'd hoped he would. Instead, he dropped it in favor of the newer, brighter ball the Johnson twins had bought him. It was a small thing, but it felt symbolic of everything I was struggling with. Max was moving forward. He was adapting, making new memories, loving new people. I was the one stuck in the past, trying to hold on to something that had already changed. "You know," Carol said as she walked me to the gate that final time, "you're welcome to visit whenever you're home from school. The boys would love to hear more stories about Max as a puppy." I thanked her, but we both knew I probably wouldn't come back. It was too hard, and it wasn't fair to Max to keep confusing him with reminders of his old life when he was clearly thriving in his new one. When I got home, I found Mom in the kitchen again, washing dishes again. We'd been politely avoiding each other for the past few days, speaking only when necessary and pretending we weren't both walking on eggshells. "I'm going back to school tomorrow," I told her. "I know. I put some leftovers in a container for you to take." "Mom." She turned around, drying her hands on her apron. "I understand why you did it," I said. "I don't agree with how you did it, but I understand why." She nodded, and I could see relief in her eyes. "But I need you to understand something too," I continued. "Max wasn't just a dog to me. He was my friend, my companion, my comfort when things were hard. Giving him away without talking to me first felt like you decided that part of my life didn't matter anymore. That wasn't my intention. I know, but that's how it felt." We stood there looking at each other, and I could see her trying to understand, trying to bridge the gap between her practical decision and my emotional response. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I'm sorry I didn't talk to you first. I thought I was protecting you from having to make a difficult decision. I'm 18, Mom. I need to start making my own difficult decisions." "You're right. You do." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a start. An acknowledgement that we'd both handled this badly, that growing up was messier and more complicated than either of us had expected. I went back to college the next day, and over the following months, the sharp pain of losing Max faded into a duller ache that I carried with me like an old injury that predicts the weather. I threw myself into my classes, made new friends, dated a boy from my psychology class who had never owned a pet and couldn't understand why I still got sad sometimes thinking about a dog I'd lost months ago. But I never stopped thinking about Max. I thought about him when I saw golden retrievers on campus, when I walked past pet stores, when I came across photos from high school on my computer. I thought about the mornings when I'd wake up and reach for his warm fur before remembering that he wasn't there. Mom and I talked every week, carefully avoiding the subject of Max until it became just another part of our shared history that we didn't discuss. She told me about her job, her book club, Dad's latest home improvement project. I told her about my classes, my friends, my plans for summer break. It was during one of these conversations in early March that she mentioned the Johnsons almost casually. "I saw Carol Johnson at the grocery store yesterday," she said. "Max is doing well. She said the boys are teaching him new tricks." "That's good," I managed. She said you haven't been by to visit." "No." "She wanted me to tell you that you're always welcome." I was quiet for a moment, trying to figure out how to explain that seeing Max happy in his new life was almost harder than missing him had been. "I know it hurts," Mom said softly. "But honey, He's happy. Isn't that what you'd want for him? Of course it is. Then maybe it's time to let yourself be happy too. 2 weeks later, I got a call that changed everything. Jamie? Carol Johnson's voice was gentle but strained. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I wanted you to hear this from me. Max had a stroke yesterday. The world went quiet except for the sound of my own heartbeat. Is he? He's alive, but he's not doing well. The vet says, well, we're just trying to keep him comfortable now. I was in my car driving home 20 minutes later, having left my roommate to explain to my professors why I'd suddenly disappeared in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I found Max in the Johnsons' living room, lying on a soft blanket by the fireplace. He looked smaller than I remembered, frail in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the body beginning to shut down. But when he saw me, his tail thumped weakly against the floor, and his eyes brightened with recognition and joy. I spent the next 3 days at the Johnsons' house, sleeping on their couch and taking turns with the boys keeping Max company. He couldn't walk anymore, could barely lift his head, but he seemed content to have people nearby, to be petted and told that he was a good boy. On the 3rd day, the vet came to the house. It's time, she said gently, and I felt something inside me break all over again. The Johnsons asked if I wanted to be alone with Max for his last moments, and I was grateful beyond words for their understanding. I held his head in my lap the way I had 1,000 times before, stroking his ears and telling him all the things I'd been carrying in my heart for months. You were the best dog, I whispered. The best friend. You made everything better just by being there. He looked up at me with those same brown eyes, clouded now with pain and exhaustion, but still full of love. I'm sorry I wasn't here more. I'm sorry I let you down. He licked my hand once, weakly, like he was telling me it was okay. I love you, Max. I'll always love you. The vet was kind and gentle, and Max went peacefully, surrounded by people who loved him. At the end, he was looking at me, and I was the last thing he saw. The Johnsons let me help bury him in their backyard, under the oak tree where he'd spent so many afternoons napping in the shade. Danny and David made a wooden marker with his name and the dates of his life, and we all stood around the small grave and shared our favorite memories of him. He was the best dog ever, Danny said solemnly. The very best, David agreed. And standing there in that backyard that had become Max's final home, I realized they were right. Not because he'd been perfect, but because he'd been perfectly loved by me, by the Johnsons, by everyone who'd been lucky enough to know him. After the funeral, I drove home to face my mother. I found her in the kitchen, as always, but this time she was sitting at the table instead of standing at the sink, and there were tears on her cheeks. I heard, she said. Carol called. I sat down across from her, and for the first time in months, we looked at each other without anger or defensiveness between us. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry I took him away from you. I'm sorry you didn't get more time with him at the end. I'm sorry too, I said. I'm sorry I made you feel like you were just the caretaker instead of someone who loved him too. We cried together then, for Max and for the way we'd handled losing him, for the misunderstandings and hurt feelings that had complicated our grief. He was a good dog, Mom said. The best. Later that evening, I went up to my room and found the photo albums I'd made in high school, full of pictures of Max from puppyhood to adolescence. There he was at 8 weeks old, so small he could fit in my lap. There he was at 6 months, already tall and gangly, but still tripping over his own feet. There he was at 2 years old, in his prime, golden coat shining in the summer sun. And there he was with me at every stage, sleeping in my bed, sitting by my side while I did homework, posing patiently for countless photos, always ready for whatever adventure I had in mind. Looking at those pictures, I realized something important. Max had lived a full life. He'd been loved completely, first by my family and then by the Johnsons. He'd known the joy of puppyhood, the satisfaction of middle age, and the peaceful contentment of being a senior dog in a household full of children who adored him. My mother's decision to give him away had hurt me deeply, but it had given Max something I couldn't: a chance to be needed and loved and important to a family who could give him the attention he deserved. Maybe that was the hardest part of growing up, learning that love sometimes means letting go, even when you're not ready, even when it breaks your heart. Max taught me that lesson twice. Once when my mother gave him away, and once when he taught me that it's possible to love someone enough to be grateful for their happiness, even when it exists without you. I still miss him. I probably always will. But I'm grateful for the 10 years I had with him, for the lessons he taught me about loyalty and love and the simple joy of being present in each moment. And I'm grateful to the Johnson family, who gave him 2 more years of feeling important and beloved, who let me say goodbye, and who understood that grief is the price we pay for love. Max was my childhood dog, but his legacy extends far beyond childhood. He taught me what it means to love unconditionally, to be present for the people who matter to us, and to find joy in simple things. He was, as Danny and David said, the very best dog. Even now, especially now, I know that's true.